take a look with me at Mark chapter 11. If you can find that, either your Bible, there's some Bibles down underneath seats. If you've got a device that you can get there, whatever means that you have available to you. Just want you to stand, and I'm just going to read a couple verses here, a few verses, I should say. Mark 11, 1 through 6. And we stand together not as some habit or ritual, but rather just out of recognition for the supremacy of God's word. So follow along with me. Mark 11, verse 1. It says, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Jesus answered them, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up. The poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. You guys can have a seat. I have a tendency to be an impatient person, particularly though with my own family. No one else. I have all the patience in the world for you as long as you're not related to me. That's kind of how it works. And so oftentimes what happens is I will take my expectations for something and I will sort of demand them on the others in my home. So for example, if I tell you that I'm either going to go to the store or I'm going to go shopping for jeans, let's say, well, I'm going to go to a store with a mission in mind, knowing exactly what I'm going in for. I'm going to go in, no one is going to stop me, I'm going to get what I need, and I'm going to get out. If I tell you I'm going to go shopping for jeans, then I'm going to go, and I'm not going to walk out with a t-shirt. I'm going in, I'll try on a pair of jeans, and then I'm either walking out with that pair of jeans or empty-handed on a mission. It's the way I approach it. But others in my family oftentimes, I'm going to the store or I'm going shopping, it means something a little bit different. I found myself on multiple occasions 4 hours later after someone has said they're running to grab some jeans or running to the store, and I'm calling, wondering, is everything okay? Some kind of accident that's happened. I'm worried, right? And then when everything's okay, I get a little frustrated. Like, oh, you just said you were going to the store. What's going on? It's been 4 or 5 hours. But the problem is I take my expectations of what that means and I force them on someone else. Just because that's the way I think about what it means to go to the store or go shopping doesn't mean that's the only way to think about it, nor, aside from when I'm speaking to my kids, does it mean it's the right way to think about it. I force that on others. And so my expectations have been set, and if they don't meet my expectations, well, then I'm completely thrown off. You see, John the Baptist here in this moment that we've been dropped into in these few verses of Mark 11, he's one of the most important figures throughout the Gospels. He's one of the most important individuals really throughout the New Testament, we could argue. He's the one that prepares the way, we looked at last Sunday, prepares the way for Jesus. I mean, what an honor, what an important role to be the one who wore the title, prepared the way for Jesus. That's who John was. Not only that, but he wore on his name tag, baptized Jesus. And John is an important man who had a significant ministry, an amazingly successful ministry. And we read last Sunday, as we looked at Matthew chapter 3, and we looked at John preparing the way. We read some of John's expectations for Jesus' ministry. Matthew chapter 3, verse 10. Again, we read this last week, but just to remind you, every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. That's what we saw last week. It's John's expectations. John's expectations for Jesus' arrival. You see, it wasn't that his expectations were wrong. His expectations were correct. Jesus was going to come in judgment, but the timeline that was in John's head. You see, John expected that they had been waiting generation after generation. I mean, all of these prophetic words that fill the first half of that book talk about the one who is to come, the coming Messiah who's going to come and make everything better. And so as John's there and he's preparing the way, his expectation is, okay, now Messiah Jesus, the chosen one, he's arrived here. Everything is going to change. It's all going to get better. The timeline is now. But that wasn't what happened. That wasn't what took place. John expected Jesus' judgment and vindication to happen immediately, but it wasn't going that way. And so John's maybe frustrated, maybe just confused. Things aren't working out the way that he expected, and so John's having to figure out how to process that. John finds himself in prison. He's looking death right in the eyes. What an odd position for him to be in when he expected that one that he baptized was going to make everything okay. So instead of this swift rescue, redemption, vindication that John expected, things are continuing to get more difficult instead of better. They're continuing to get more difficult for John as John's in jail, and also the opposition against Jesus is rising. John asks him the question in verse 3 that we read. Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Are you really the one? I mean, he knew he was special. There was no doubt about that. But all of the words that John knew by heart probably about the coming Messiah, the one who's going to come and make everything different and better, Jesus wasn't fitting into that box of expectations for John. So John's asking him, hey, are you really the Messiah? Are you the one that we've been expecting? And the truth was, God's reality here had not met John's expectations. That was what was throwing John off. God's reality here had not met John's expectations. And so I think this is just a great point right now for us to stop and to make a real obvious statement. That statement is, God's plans are always greater than our expectations. It's an obvious statement, maybe even a bit of a platitude in feel. When we hear God's plans are always greater than our expectations. You see, I can picture in my mind this 21st century, maybe from the South, church culture, saturated person going up to John in this moment and saying, John, don't worry, God is in control. Or, John, don't worry, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And when people say those things to you, it makes you want to slap somebody. It makes you angry. Because you're like, do you know where I am right now? Do you understand what's going on here? My wife's stepmother was going to visit her uncle on his deathbed. And you can imagine the emotions that some of you have even experienced that firsthand, but the emotions that would surround going and seeing somebody for the final time and going and exchanging words, and what are you going to say? How are you going to say it? And so she says to him, Uncle Kenneth, I love you. He says back to her something that the family will never forget. He says, I appreciate it, but that doesn't do me a lot of good right now. It's the truth. An empty platitude of words that were given to somebody who their life was over. And here we see John in the spot, and we could make all of these statements, God's plans, they're always greater than our expectations, but oftentimes those truths, however true they may be, they feel like empty platitudes amidst the reality of our circumstances that we're navigating through. John had given his entire life to serving the Lord. His entire life to serving the Lord. He's in jail right now because of the people who had come and began following him. His preaching of the gospel. Not only that, but the end of the story is that John dies, beheaded, killed. He's in prison for 2 out of the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry. He's beheaded, dies a martyr's death. Honestly, that death may have been the same year as this interaction that we're reading here. There are other storylines like this in the Bible. You have the Apostle Paul. Maybe some of you are familiar with this moment. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul says, a thorn was given to me in my flesh. And he says 3 times, I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. See, Paul doesn't tell us what it was. A thorn. Maybe some of you, if that's the first time you've heard it, you're thinking that he went by a rose bush and he's stuck, and that's not it. What Paul's talking about is an affliction, a significant physical affliction. I mean, scholars argue, was it malaria? Was it some kind of epilepsy? Was it an eye disease that affected his ability to see? I mean, he was talking about something that was incredibly painful or debilitating. And the end of the story for Paul, God didn't take it away. He says, my grace is sufficient for you. Don't you know, Paul, when he heard that statement, my grace is sufficient for you. He had to have been thinking, well, that doesn't do me a lot of good right now. I'm in pain, I'm hurting, and I'm doing everything that I can to follow you. Probably the same way that John felt. We just read it. They both had to have struggled. John, why was he in jail? He had given himself to the gospel, to serving the Lord and Jesus in ministry, and now he's stuck in jail. Why? What sense does that make? Both men giving their lives to serve the gospel of Jesus Christ. So how does Jesus respond? How does Jesus respond in this moment as John's asking him this question? He says, tell him this. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up. The poor have good news preached to them, and blessed is the one who is not offended by me. So think about it for a minute. John's expectations. Are you really the Messiah? I'm stuck in jail here and I'm about to die. Why haven't you done what you said you were going to do? That's what John's thinking. John's asking. Jesus says, here's what I've been doing. The truth is, the vast majority, like I said, 2 out of the 3 years of Jesus' life of ministry took place while John was in jail. So think about the things. It was likely the woman at the well moment, the calling of the disciples, their journeying together, the healing of the paralytic at the pool. All of these things were happening as John is in jail and Jesus is engaging in ministry. John had no idea. He had no idea what was taking place. You see, John's view of life is very similar to mine oftentimes. And that is that this world's the cinematic story, and I'm the leading actor. And nothing happens that's not in the screenshot with me. It's oftentimes a worldview that I slip into. Everything's the cinematic storyline, and I'm the lead actor, and so if it doesn't fit within the frame with me, well, then it's not really happening. That's not the case. That's not the case at all, and that's what Jesus is showing John. The truth is that Jesus is the leading actor in the story of redemption, and we play a supporting role. He is the one that's always on screen. You and I, we come through and supporting actors. We make cameos. We're in the frame. We're out of the frame. But Jesus is always in the center, and just because we're not there on screen doesn't mean he's not working. It just means we may not know about it. Jesus is the leading actor in the story of redemption. You and I, we just play a supporting role. You see, there are gospel rescue storylines that exist all around us. And many of them, friends, they don't include us as far as we know. Others include us, yet we don't even know it. And then yet others include us, and we find ourselves knowingly right in the middle of them. You see, we're not aware so much of the time, just like John wasn't aware, how our story, how our lives, and how our circumstances fit into this bigger picture of God's redemptive plan. How our little moments and our cameos and our vignettes fit into this grand picture of his rescue. I've said this statement many times before, literally, probably for 15 years, off and on. I don't remember where I picked it up, but I'll never forget it. You and I, we see life in these instant little tiny Polaroid snapshots, while our God paints on a canvas the size of the universe. I've said it for years, over and over again. Somebody else said it. It's not original to me. But that perspective of life is so true. You and I, we see this moment, we see this snapshot, and yet God's looking at that snapshot, and it's on this mosaic that looks so different, and it's so much more glorious than we could ever imagine. And he sees how that one moment, that one piece fits into something far greater. And that's what Jesus is trying to show John. You don't know what's going on, and I know it didn't meet your expectations, and things are going much different than you thought they were, but salvation history is happening. People are being healed, the blind are seeing, lepers healed. And so Jesus says in verse 6, "Blessed is the one who is not offended by me." Offended, it's the sense of stumbling there, stumbling or falling, falling, tripping. Within the context, it's a spiritual mishap. But what Jesus is describing is the one who trusts me. The one who does not see what I'm doing and then ends up in this faith wipeout because of what's going on and what's happening, how I'm working. And so to put the statement simply in a positive way, what Jesus is saying here, Blessed is the one who trusts in my ways. That's what he's saying. Blessed is the one who trusts in my ways. You see, it sounds a lot like that answer, right? That God gave Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. In other words, I'm enough. Trust me. I am enough. You may not know, you may not understand. It may be outside of what's going on in your life. It may make zero sense to you. But I'm working. Trust me. My grace is sufficient for you. You see, we're in this Advent season, and we talk about it. We've defined it every week. Advent is this annual rhythm where we imagine a promise that our eyes cannot see in order to ignite our passion and change our tomorrow. You see, if we believe that God's love displayed by a baby that was born in a manger, his son, by the Virgin Mary, and then living the life that he did, and then dying on the cross, taking on the punishment that you and I deserve, dying the worst death imaginable, but then the grave couldn't hold him, and they run up on that third day to find an empty tomb because he was victorious over death, rose in victory 3 days later. And all of those things, including 40 days after that, the ascension to the Father, all of those things fulfilled promises of what we see spoken of before the New Testament, the Old Testament. Promises given, promises given, promises given. And then we walk into this story and we see promise fulfilled, promise fulfilled, promise fulfilled. So you and I, as we gather here this morning in this Advent season, and we look ahead and we're celebrating promises fulfilled through the birth of Jesus, we can have an enormous confidence that the promise of his return will be fulfilled as well. Promises of his return will be fulfilled as well. And so as we look at that, this Advent season, it's calling us to live with urgency, live today as if he's coming tomorrow, and for us to live with a faith that doesn't stumble, it doesn't fall, doesn't trip when we're not able to answer those questions that we ask. Every one of us in this room, if you're honest, you've asked the question, you've heard others ask, why hasn't he come already? Why am I continuing to have this pain that I have? Why am I continuing in the sickness that I feel? Why hasn't he come? Why didn't he keep us from walking through this global catastrophic event, this war that happened, this act of terror? Why hasn't he come yet? All the why questions that we ask, the answer to all of them. Why are we still struggling? Why are we going through difficulty? Why hasn't he removed the thorn in our side? Why hasn't he worked in the ways that we expected him to work? Why hasn't he come back so that you or your family member or someone else didn't have to journey through the pain that they had to go through? The answer is not empty platitudes. The answer actually has the foundation of history behind it. Hebrews 11:1, the greatest definition of faith, right, that exists. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Faith, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so it's unqualified faith. Unqualified faith is the strength that carries us as we anticipate his return. Unqualified faith. Now you may be thinking, what do you mean by that, Matt? Unqualified faith. Simply unqualified, it's without limitation. It's without, there's no asterisk there. There's no footnote. It's not faith as long as, or faith if, like for John in this moment, we see a qualified faith. It's like, are you really the Messiah? Because you really can't be the Messiah. There must be another one because you haven't done what I expected you to do. So Jesus reorients his thinking there, blows his expectations. You and I An unqualified faith is our strength. And so it's not a matter of you finding yourselves in these circumstances of life, the bottom of the roller coaster, the suffering at the bottom of the hill, that huge weight on your shoulders. And you say, I believe in God, but only if he can get me out of this. It's qualified faith. No, it's unqualified faith. It's the strength that carries us until his return. That means it's in the moments when things do not work out as we expect. It's in the moments where things go in such a way that we could have never imagined, or even in the moments where things end up with a storyline that we can't even fathom how God would use those things. It's still trusting. It's still believing. It's still hearing my grace is sufficient for you. It's still believing that he reigns supreme and he is the leading actor in the story of redemption history that then gives us strength. It gives us strength to be able to go another day, to wake up another morning and continue to journey ahead in that day in faith, because we believe in a God who works in ways that are greater than our imaginations could ever expect or understand. That's the God we worship. Unqualified faith. Amidst pain and difficulty, unqualified faith. Amidst those moments, seasons of life where expectations are unmet, God's plans are always greater than our expectations. And I know how that feels. I know how that feels to be at that point in life where everything is crumbling, all of the weight is on your shoulders, and someone shares some kind of statement like this, and you say, really? You have no idea what I'm going through. That's what you think. If you're a good quote-unquote Christian, you just say thank you. But your brain, you're thinking it. You have no idea. How could that be? There's no way you would say that statement to me or believe that if you understood what I was going through. No, they're not empty platitudes. The truths by which we can live. And just as in John is in this moment right now, you and I can hear those same words from Jesus that John did by those messengers. Jesus says, I know you're in jail. Whatever that looks like for you in your life, you define that box. Fill in the blank. It's not jail, but whatever that box is for you. Season of life, of suffering, of health difficulty, of financial difficulty, marriage, parenting, whatever it is. I know you're in jail, but I'm healing the lame. The blind are seeing. The dead are being brought to life. There's a grand story of redemption history that's taking place right now, and just because you're not the leading actor in the screenplay doesn't mean it's not happening. You see, I picture God up there. I share with you guys what I picture in my head way too much because you guys are eventually going to think I'm really crazy, but I see this, if you watch these like crime or spy TV shows, and probably more so in the 80s and 90s. Now they have these big touch screens on all of them that they use, but you watch those older movies, they'd have these Post-it notes and they'd have yarn to another Post-it note. Maybe it was another picture of somebody in yarn. And you'd look at this board, right, that they were working on to put together this case that they were trying to solve. And you'd have these faces or Post-it notes with yarn connected all over the place. You see, the moments that you and I see, all we know is that one Post-it note. It's all we can see, and yet God, He's looking at this bulletin board, and there is yarn stretched all over the place between our lives and our stories and our pain, our suffering, our victories, our joy, and His redemption story that is spider webbing out all over the place in ways that we could never expect, never understand. This morning, before we celebrate in communion, I just want to invite you. Two things. What we've described here is a hope that is inexpressible. It's an amazing hope. It's a hope that comes only through Jesus. And if you're here this morning and you hear that and you say, I don't feel that hope, I don't have that picture of love that you described of Jesus coming in his birth and dying on the cross and rising again 3 days later, that hasn't affected my life yet, well then my invitation to you is that yes, now is the time to begin to walk in hope and joy inexpressible. What a better time than the Advent season when we're called to live with urgency as if Jesus is coming back tomorrow. His invitation to you is just believe. Come, believe, follow me. If that's you this morning, we'd love to talk to you. You can grab one of us here. You can grab me here. People usually hang out over in that prayer hallway right there afterwards. You can go find somebody there. Others of you in here, maybe you've been walking with Jesus for 40, 50 years. But you're still in jail somewhere. Parenting, finances, whatever it is for you. That this morning God would give you that picture of that big cork bulletin board and that you would believe with an unqualified faith today that whatever that jail is for you, the faith in his working, that Jesus is the leading actor, that his ways will always be greater than our expectations. That would give you freedom to break the walls of the entrapment that you feel. That you would begin to walk in his hope and faith and see it cascade over every area of your life. Not just one or two days a week, but every area, unqualified faith. If you bow your head and close your eyes with me, if you've placed your faith in Jesus at any time, whether moments ago or many years ago, well, then you're welcome to come up whenever you're ready to these tables. Take the bread, which represents Christ's body that was broken for you, and dip it in the cup, which represents his blood that was shed for you. And as Paul says, we do so proclaiming his death until he comes. Father, we thank you. We thank you for the gospel story. We thank you that this morning we can get together and we can find a tiny little passage of your word and see how it just explodes out into our daily lives. Father, the freedom that we find in you, Father, the freedom that we find when we begin to understand that we're not suffering for suffering's sake, that you haven't just forgotten about us, but rather you're working, Father, on this eternal, cosmic picture of redemption history. And there's lines from our lives that attach and cross all over the place, but just because we don't see it doesn't mean you're not working. Father, let us stand confidently upon the promises of your word this morning, believing that you are working in everything for your good first, which is our good as well. In the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, Father, might we walk in an unqualified faith amidst this season. God, whatever we need to do today to live urgency, to live with great urgency, as we look at your return, would you have your way with us? Have your way with us.